Okay, in this video, I'm going to attempt to answer in this video and others the question I hear all the time: what telescope should I buy? And this is a lot of times parents wanting to buy a telescope for their child or getting into it themselves. Which one should I buy? I'm going to list some things that you should consider first, and then I'm going to go over each one individually. Um, the big question is, the first one you want to ask: how much can I spend? Uh, if you're buying a telescope for a younger kid, $100 is a good estimate. Uh, Remember that you get what you pay for. The more you pay, the better you get in most cases. That's not always true. $100 is a good starting point for a good estimate of what you should spend for a kid. And I'll get into that a little bit later here. Excuse me. Another question you should ask yourself before you buy it: what are you going to use the telescope for? Are you going to look at pictures? Uh, think about taking pictures. Are you going to look at the moon? Are you going to look at the planets? If you're buying it for a younger kid or somebody that's starting, a good place to start is to think about the moon and planets. They're a lot of fun. But that's the second question you should ask yourself. And again, who is going to use the telescope? Is it an adult? Is it a kid? How durable is it? Um, who you're buying it for is a good part of how much you can spend. It's all interrelated. I want to mention keeping your expectations in check. And again, you get what you pay for. Um, and I'll cover this in a separate slide, but I want to mention that here just so it's in your mind when you're thinking about what telescopes should I buy. A lot of people have this view that they're going to buy a telescope and be immediately in awe, and I'll get to that later on. Do I need a mount for my telescope, and what kind of mount? And I'm going to do a separate video on mounts, but this is something to keep in mind. Most younger kids' telescopes, including the $100 ones that I mentioned up here that you could probably get a good one for, come with mounts. They're not the best of mounts, but they work for the purpose. Um, but that's something to consider. Do I need to buy a mount? If you buy a telescope without a mount, you're going to need to buy a mount. Are you doing visual observation or astrophotography? If you're just starting out, I would recommend staying away from astrophotography to begin with. Get familiar with the night sky by doing observations first. Um, Astrophotography becomes very expensive relatively quickly. And I can hear the people that do astrophotography watching this chuckling. Here's something else that a lot of people don't consider. How dark are your skies? In order to look through a telescope and do good visual observation, your skies have to be relatively dark. There's nothing worse than somebody going and spending $100 for their kid in the middle of New York City on a telescope and then not being able to see anything. Can you get to a spot that has darker skies? Are there any parks around you? Uh, Light pollution is a huge issue with astrophotography and astronomy. Something you need to consider. All right, let's go to the next slide here. Okay, let's cover how much can you spend real quick here. Like I said, you get what you pay for. Keep that in mind. If you're paying under $100, something to consider is buy a binocular first. Buy a pair of binoculars. If you have one sitting around, play with that first. It can be just as good as some of the lower priced telescopes. Um, Easier to handle in most cases. If you're looking straight up in the sky, you're going to get a stiff neck. That's one of the problems with it. But one of the things with visual astronomy, it's kind of hard on the neck overall. I mean, looking through a telescope, you're always twisting and bending down, and it can be difficult. But Uh, Binoculars are a good starting point. Cheap department store telescopes. I want to talk about this. They have the eye-catching packages. That is not realistic. You'll see these things with Jupiter and all the rings and it's a foot wide and if I get that telescope, I'm going to see Jupiter with all its neat colors and all the rings or the bands. Uh-uh. Not realistic. Be very careful when shopping for telescopes. Don't look at the pictures on the box and think that's what you're going to see. Not realistic. And again, like I said a couple of times, you can get a decent kid's telescope for around $100, but beware. Read reviews and do some research. Even Amazon has reviews, and you even have to take those with a grain of salt. Make sure you're not getting paid reviews. I'll go into reviews a little bit later. Um, Research is a big thing. Just don't go out and buy something. Take an hour or two and look around, see what people recommend. Here's a big one. If you can, join an astronomy club or email them and ask questions. Most astronomy clubs, you can find them on Facebook. Do a web search. Put, for example, if I live in Lebanon or Pennsylvania, I could put in there uh, astronomy clubs near Lebanon. I know the Harrisburg Astronomy Club. I'm a member of that, although with COVID, I don't know if I'm still a member or not because they haven't had many meetings lately. I'll probably have to get in contact with them. Um, Very helpful. Most astronomy clubs will be happy to answer your questions. Again, you're getting one or more people's opinion. Your opinion might not match their opinion, so you kind of have to be a little wary. But they're the best source that I know of astronomy clubs. Keep this in mind. You go to a dealer. Some dealers, not all, some dealers don't have your best interest in mind. They're trying to sell you a telescope. You'll ask them, is this a good one for a kid? Oh, yeah, it's great for a kid. Uh, it's buyer beware, typical thing. Here's another one that's kind of related to the astronomy club. Look for star parties in your area. Ask questions. Politely ask to look through their scopes. Be nice. Some people have expensive mounts and they don't want other people looking through their scopes. You've got to be respectful. Most of them will be happy to let you look. Uh, Again, remember everyone has an opinion and you might not agree with it later, and I'll show you a later slide. But another thing to keep in mind at star parties, a lot of the people at them are set up for astrophotography. You can't do a visual observation through a telescope that is currently set up for astrophotography. So if you ask them and they say, well, I'm actually taking pictures, understand they're not being rude. Their telescope is set up to take pictures. The two don't mix. You have a camera where the eyepiece should be, so you can't look through that telescope. So keep that in mind. Uh, I can't say enough about astronomy clubs and star parties. Check out your libraries. They may have some telescopes to sign out. Some of them do. Uh, Something for you to look into. Here's an example of how difficult this is. And this is why a lot of people won't even do a video like I'm doing now. You're really opening up a can of worms with this type of video. And I'm trying to be as honest and upfront with you as possible. But here's a great one. This is a $100 telescope I found reviews for, and I just wanted to show you this. First review, great. I'm not going to read the review yourself. It's up there if you want to read it. But 5 stars. Next one, 4 stars. Very nice beginner telescope. Next one, excellent. First time buyer brought it for my son and he's loving it. Then boom, 1 star. Trash. Your eyes work just as well. The tripod blanks big time. Next one, 2 stars. Save your money. Next one, no different than looking through binoculars. Next one, 5 stars. opinions. Uh, a lot of this relates to expectations. This person was probably bought this box and saw a big picture of Jupiter and said, I want this one because I can see Jupiter. And then was like, oh, it did not meet his expectations. That's why I put that bullet in there. Expectations are very important. But if you read reviews, you're going to see a lot of this. Unless you get into bigger ones, and then, you'll see, if you see, an $800 telescope and somebody says it's trash, that's an eye opener. They either had a really bad experience or got a bad particular scope. But reviews, keep them in mind, do some research, and I'll go to the next slide. What do you want to look at? And I'm going to open this. It's going to be a two-part slide, and the first part is going to be a public service announcement on safety, and it mainly has to do with the sun. Never, and I can't say this enough, never, never, never look at the sun with an unfiltered telescope. That sounds like an obvious thing, but you'd be surprised. It will destroy your eye and your telescope. And not necessarily in that order. And here's another perfect thing. Never leave a telescope with the lens cap off during the daytime. Now, this sounds obvious too, but a lot of people, especially younger people, will go out at night, stay up till 10, 11, looking at the moon or something, and then, hey, it's bedtime, get in here. Don't bring the scope in. Don't cover the scope. Wake up the next morning. The scope's facing east. The sun's shining into the scope, and they've just cooked their optics. Don't leave the telescope with the lens cap off during the daytime. Two safety announcements. I'm sure there's a lot more, but the sun will ruin your eye. I can't stress that enough. Okay, part two. Again, I already mentioned planets and moons, and I do say moons are best for younger kids. Looking at the moon, I just can't say enough about how fun it is observing the moon for younger kids through a telescope and for adults. To see close up all the craters that you can't actually see and see why, you look up the moon, you see the man in the moon, and then you look through a telescope, you say, oh, that crater is humongous. And that's why it looks like there's a man in the moon, the eyeballs. It's a lot of fun. I say moons. If you look at Jupiter, yes, you can see Jupiter's moons. And I don't want to say all, but in a relatively inexpensive telescope, they'll just be little points of light, but they're still Jupiter's moon, and that's kind of cool. Yes, you can see some nebulas and galaxies with lower cost telescopes. One of the perfect examples is Orion. Keep your expectations in check, and I'll get into that in one of the next slides. You can see Orion. You can see Andromeda Galaxy. You can see Andromeda with the naked eye. It looks like a little gray smudge. You can see it better through binoculars. This is a good one for kids and adults to see another galaxy. It's very big, actually, in relationship to the sky. In general, and this is a very general statement, and I kind of hesitated putting this in here, but in general, in line with your expectations, the deeper, more distant, and smaller an object is, the more expensive the telescope will need to be to observe it. You're not going to see Pluto through a $100 telescope. If you can, man, you're good. But that's a general statement, something to keep in mind. Google Sky Map is a good place to start for finding objects. One of the big problems when you buy a telescope, you look up the sky, okay, where am I looking? Obviously the moon you can see, but if you're looking for something like Orion and Andromeda, now Orion's not so bad because if you know the constellation, you can find it. But Andromeda, okay, where's that at? Google Sky Map is just one example. It's a good starting point for finding an object. It'll kind of map out where Andromeda is, and you'll point you in the right direction. Okay, it's over here, I can look over there. That's a good starting point. A lot of people don't consider this until they get a telescope and they look up in the sky and they're like, ooh, whoa, what am I looking at? It's a big sky and the objects are very small. Okay. And here's a big one on keep your expectations in check. Don't if I had a nickel for every time I was at a star party, and I heard somebody go, well, that's just a gray speck. Don't expect NASA Hubble quality views through a telescope. If you had NASA's budget and you could spend billions of dollars, you could get Hubble view and launch it in space because we're looking through the atmosphere. The Hubble is not. You could get the views that Hubble has. Even the most expensive portable telescopes won't give you Hubble quality views. Astrophotography, if you're really into it, you can get Hubble quality stuff. It comes with a price, and it's usually a pretty big price. One of the comments I hear is it's just a gray fuzz. Yup. In most cases, when you look through a telescope, you will not see colors. Um, the amount of light hitting your eye is just not enough. Now, if you take astrophotography in long exposures, you can start seeing colors, yes. If you look at Jupiter and you have a half decent telescope, even maybe $100 one, and you might be pushing it. If you look at Jupiter, you might see the bands in Jupiter, some of the bigger ones. It's just going to be a different shade of gray. It's not going to be orange. You can't see color through telescopes. There's just not enough light. A lot of people look at stars expecting to see something other than a dot of light. You're not going to. If you look at a bright star through a telescope, it's just going to be a bigger dot of light. I don't know exactly what people are expecting. I don't know if they're expecting to see planets, but I hear this quite a bit. Well, the stars are just a dot of light. Well, the stars are just a dot of light. Other planets' moons are also just a dot of light. Yes, you can see Jupiter's moons through a relatively inexpensive telescope. They're just a dot of light. You're not going to look at the moons of Jupiter and see craters. It's just going to be a dot of light. That still doesn't. It's still pretty cool. I mean, you can see multiple moons in Jupiter, but they are going to be just a dot of light. This is something a lot of people don't consider. Tracking the object you're looking at will be hard. And a lot of this has to do with the mount, and I'll get into that in a later video. If you're looking at Jupiter, you're going to have it all lined up, and you're going to say, hey, there it is, and you're going to send your kid over there, and he says, I don't see it. That's because it passed through the view of the scope. It doesn't stay in one spot for very long. You're going to be constantly adjusting your telescope's position to keep that in view. And until you practice it a little bit, it's going to be hard. That's not easy, and I want people to realize looking at stuff and tracking it takes practice. I mean, I don't want to say it's hard. It takes practice. Maybe that's a better word for it. Okay. Now this is almost 20 minutes already. I'm going to do some upcoming videos, and I would love people's feedback. If you want to see a video on something that I don't have here, please let me know. I've been doing this for 6 years now, so I've kind of, maybe even a little more than 6, but I've kind of forgot all the things that I had problems with when I started. So if you have something that you want to ask, feel free. Leave a comment. I'm going to cover different types of telescopes. What are their benefits and disadvantages? There are I want to say 3 or 4 main types that you will see, and I will cover all those and try and cover benefits and disadvantages. This is a big one that you're going to see in the cheaper telescopes, aperture and magnification. What does that mean? People all make think, well, I want something that's going to magnify it as much as possible. Not necessarily. Magnification might improve what you're looking at. It makes tracking it harder. It makes resolution worse in some cases. So I'll cover some of that stuff. Mounts. $100 telescopes for kids usually come with an inexpensive mount. Good starting point. Uh, if your telescope doesn't come with a mount, then you're going to have to buy one, and that could be another expensive possibility. I started out with relatively inexpensive mounts, and I've gone up to the Orion Atlas, which I think is a pretty good mount. And I don't want to say brands too much, but I will say what I have because I have personal experience with it. I don't want this string of videos to become a brand over brand type of thing. I use Orion, so I will mention Orion. There are a lot, probably better scopes than Orion. Uh, I don't want to get into that aspect of it. Um, I enjoy Orion. I'll leave it at that. But a mount can be, if you want a good tracking mount, thousands, 1,000 or more. It can get expensive. I'm going to go into observational astronomy and what about taking pictures? People always want to, well, how can I get pictures? Um, I would, if you're just starting out, I would lean towards staying away from astrophotography to begin with. Get familiar with how to use a telescope, visual first, and then if you want to increase, go to astrophotography. You're going to, this becomes, and I'm going to hear everybody chuckling again in the background, this becomes a money pit. Uh, you buy something, and then you buy something better, and then you buy something better. This becomes a money pit, and my wife will agree with that. Then I'm going to do a video on lenses and filters. What the 2 times borrow? How does that affect what you're looking at? Benefits, disadvantages, and some filters. Filters are mainly for astrophotography, but I'll cover those a little bit also. Okay, so that's about 23 minutes. I didn't want to get too long. This is a very difficult subject to cover in an amount of time. Um, if you have specific questions, please leave me a comment, whether it be on Facebook or in YouTube. I will try and answer your questions. I've been doing this for a while. I'm not an expert. I am relatively good. Um, there are people that are far better than me. Um, I will do my best to answer your question, or I will get the answer for you. Let's put it that way. Um, I don't know what your questions might be, so let me know. If you're looking forward to any of these videos, or you want to see any of my other videos, please subscribe to my YouTube channel, and that'll automatically keep you updated on the ones that I'm going to be posting here. I'll try and do 1 a week, maybe 2 a week. This is my second YouTube video this week. This is the first in this series. But again, leave me comments, subscribe, and you have a good day.